Good day, listeners. Thank you for joining us on Beyond the Checkbox. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Todd, where we learn how to integrate more mental wellness into your organization through frontline leaders. I have been introduced to Darren Winterford, who is the CEO of EdApp. And EdApp, if you have not heard, is a market-leading mobile learning management system. If you're part of an organization, big or small, you can put content on there, micro content on their app that essentially turns it into a beautiful learning experience for your employees. So for training, for onboarding, for any type of learning that you need to do in your organization, EdApp is the market leading application to do this. And Darren Winterford, in talking to him, you tell right away that he's articulate, he is bright, he's got a very calm and cool demeanor. He's Australian, so he's got that kind of like down under cool thing going for him. And most importantly, for me, he was easy to talk to, and he was able to articulate complex thoughts about the next step of micro learning and learning in our COVID world, how you maintain a team that is literally all over the world and exponentially growing. They've had 300% growth in a matter of months, and he's been able to keep that culture tight. And he's got some nice principles about that. And also we talk about mental health, how to maintain that during a time like COVID, how to maintain that and help your employees during a time like this. He was practical. He was decisive. He had some great stories. I love talking to Darren Winterford, and I think you will enjoy it as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Darren Winterford and the Beyond the Checkbox episode. Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, because I want to touch on like EdApp, and we'll talk about the technology. We'll talk about your growth, but the culture of the company, I think, is really important. And you've obviously been able to grow with this steep curve because you're training people, you're getting them on board, you're fitting them into your culture. Like, how do you do that? That's not an easy thing to do, to grow as fast as you are. So what are some of the principles you're using to go that hard?
I think the most important thing, there's a saying that we adopt, which is, hire slow, fire fast. And so we really make sure, first of all, we've learnt from enough other startups, around the place that, because you've got a role vacant, doesn't mean you have to stick someone in that role, in the next 5 minutes. And I think from a starting point, once you have a culture established, you really want to make sure, while you're checking for functional fit, you're testing for skills, a really important factor that I think a lot of people miss is the cultural fit. And you want to make sure that you're bringing in people that each time will add something further to your culture that may not necessarily fit into the exact groove you're in, but that they're people that are going to work really well with the rest of the teams. They're going to be someone that represents the sort of level of ownership that you're looking for. I mean, I think startups are famous for, if there's one common theme, it's that, you don't get the direction that you would get in a larger company. And so straight away, they're those traits that you're looking for. So you need people that are pretty self-determined, people that are pretty self-driven. So one of the things we did, honestly, and I would say that we stumbled on it. I later read about it in a book. I think it was Google that mentioned it. One of the founders there. But what we stumbled on were athletes. And very early on, we found that when you're growing fast and there's not a lot of direction, some of the most self-determined people out there are former or existing athletes. Most of them extremely self-driven. They don't have people pushing them, particularly those that aren't in a team sport. And we had some wonderful experiences with, I would say, first off, I was a member of a British rowing team who worked in client success, and she was amazing. And, we looked at her traits, what makes this particular person so fantastic. And this is outside of her, skill set, which was amazing. We found another who was a representative swimmer and had actually got a scholarship to Ohio State University over there in the States, from Australia. She was a swimmer discovered in North Sydney in a swimming pool, transported to Ohio State for a swimming scholarship. Now, again, swimming, rowing, they're both fairly individual and fairly, I would say, activities that require a lot of self-determination. And then from there, we really began to see, look, this is a common trait, and it may not be an individual sport, but it may be team sport. So our head of people is an ex-gymnast, and almost everyone, are currently, even our engineering team, we have engineers that are currently playing, under 35 soccer, but they probably played quite a lot, earlier on, higher league than that. So we tend to find that there were some traits we were looking for that built that core team. And from that core team where we, really start to feel like we have that culture right and we have that right mix of people, we make sure that while people have a skill and a functional set, if they're joining the team, that there's also some of those other traits that we think we can take advantage of, and they will, continue to add to that culture.
And do you find it like a push-pull between fitting people into your culture and also creating diversity? Because those are two important things. And there's like a almost I don't know the word, like it's almost more comfortable to pull in someone who is going to be like everyone else. And then, there's a risk of just getting too many people that are the same.
Yeah, too many extroverts and too many high achievers. What we find is we're very lucky in that for all of, I think, sometimes the criticism that Australia faces on its skill shortage and sometimes some of its immigration policies, we're very similar to Canada. We're considered a frontier country, and almost every young person from around the world would like to at some point spend some time here, and it's a very common thing to hear, oh, one day, or I'd love to spend a couple of years down there. And what that means for us is we've been really successful with what you might call a skilled visa program, where we have been able to source from the United States, from Europe, from South America, from North America, from India, from Pakistan. And so what we have is, yes, we have, I would say, a very high number of high achievers, but we also have enormous cultural diversity, which then gives you, I think, that diversity that you're talking about. So you have achievers almost from various cultures, various backgrounds, people with very varied experiences. So I think, I've actually lost count, but I remember even when we were a team of less than 20, we used to joke that we had more than 7 nations, which is like a rugby kind of a rugby competition. But now that we have, approaching 60, I believe that number is now 20. So it's 1 in 3 come from, a different background. And of course, we have the advantage. We have offices here in Australia that are extremely multicultural, but then we also have the New York office and we have a London office. And what we're also very big on is exporting and importing culture. So there would be probably 4 or 5, both engineers and salespeople that have been exported from Australia who really fancy doing a couple of years in New York or a couple of years in London. And likewise, talent that has been, if you like, born and bred in either the States or in Great Britain has also been imported into the teams here. And so that gives you, a wonderful cultural mix. And so whilst you do have, quite a lot of high achievers, it's that wonderful cultural background that gives you that diversity you're looking for.
Any struggles there, or like lumps or bumps that in building that team, what have been some of the lessons learned, some of the things you would never do again? Yeah, what are some of the storming and norming kind of pieces there?
Yeah, I think that we did make early on the classic mistake, like other startups, that we've now learned that, look, there was a time there where user base was expanding rapidly, customer base was expanding, and particularly in the engineering function, we were thinking about it a little bit too much like bums on seats, and onboarding a lot of people that may not be the correct fit and doing it fast can have a real impact on not just culture, but also on performance. And so, it's taken a while for me to come to realize it and for people to be telling me, but it really is about, sometimes you've got to slow down to speed up. And sometimes it can be about using a team that's currently, that you have in place more effectively or pointing in a certain direction and bringing in those people, not to be driving the company forward with, let's say, feature development or something similar like that, but it might be about actually having those new people that are onboarding take a little bit longer than you might like, when it comes to resource planning, and don't bring on a great deal at a time. Most people now, I think in most startups, if you talk to most head of people, they will talk about, phases of onboarding, but it won't necessarily be, bringing on huge change altogether. Because again, what we'll actually do is, you'll end up going backwards because there are not enough people to manage the amount of new people. Their resources get spread actually to helping others understand, and what you've actually done is slow down. Well, I think we found the same with junior staff. It's wonderful to have inexperienced people in a team that you can bring through a team and coach. Get the balance wrong, particularly bringing on too many, and again, you will detract from the resources of the highly skilled people, and you'll actually go backwards.
Yeah, tell me about that, because that's a struggle, I think, for a lot of startups and even more mature companies who are working in smaller business units. The balance of big experience, little experience, and the age diversity, that's something that it sounds like you've thought a lot about. Do you have an approach to that? Like, how do you take that into consideration?
Yeah, I think everyone struggles when budgets are tight. That's when things are the most difficult. Let's talk about engineering, and a mid-level engineer or a junior engineer. You're talking about the difference of, it might be that the wage difference or the salary difference might be 50%. So it's quite a lot. We always want to trust, and we do personally at EdApp. We love youth over experience where there is passion and curiosity. For the most part, I think that most startups around the world that have been successful have had the advantage of that. People that are young, people that are hungry, and I think, the curiosity or the growth mindset is really important. And that is, I think, a fantastic way to get started. Once the problems become a little bit harder, and once there is some wisdom required and some experience, and people that need to start putting things into some structures where you can't be just working, burning the midnight oil every night, and it's, back to college days and lots of coffee and ramen, and, that's when you need to start having a look at the balance of your team. And what is remarkable is that, again, if you hire correctly, bringing in one person that might be relatively senior, when you have, say, a group of 5 or 6 junior people, you will find that that person there will not only be really highly effective at driving you forward, but also they can make all of those people extremely productive, because they can set them in the right direction. And so I think that was particularly in engineering, I would implore people that, a 50% difference in salary might end up being, a 200 or 250% difference in productivity. And it's not just productivity, it also has culture impacts. If you have a team that go down the wrong path and they're curious and all of those great, let's say, vibes are there, they're all doing it for the right reasons, but you put in a lot of effort and you get to a dead end. And you get to a dead end because that particular group didn't have the experience and has got to that dead end thinking this seems exactly the right thing to do. If you do that a couple of times, it's okay. The third or fourth time, you will start to see some frustration. You will start to see some, oh, not this again, the next time that you embark on something like that. And so it can be negative on even a group of the most curious and the most enthusiastic. Again, it took some time for me to realize, and I'm not talking about going and employing someone that's got 25 years with IBM or Microsoft, but definitely someone that might have a few years in another startup that's been through what you've been through before. And I think that would be a really strong recommendation on just knowing when to provide some guidance, particularly if you're, and again, here I'm being very engineering led, but if you're not technical as a leader, then that's something that's really, really important.
And do you struggle with, like, when you're bringing in someone senior, there's a cultural aspect, like bringing in like that new culture and how that might shift things. providing leadership to that individual. I imagine there's a shift there too, from like young team to experienced team, where you're thinking, how do I lead that individual who has that 10 years of experience more?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it needs to be that dramatic. We certainly, like I say, we don't go from, you know, the hoodie to the suit and the MBA. You know, it's not that dramatic. You're
Yeah.
still getting people that are you know that are growth mindset, that are exploring. So, you know, whilst they might have, maybe they've started a family, but you would still imagine that on the weekend at nights they're still exploring the latest tech. They're still reading. They're still exploring. If you're not hiring that person, then you've probably got it wrong for your team. So, but there are some of us that are beyond 30 and that are still curious and that are still eager to lead a young team, but we don't need to take them all the way to complete maturity. We're happy still to explore, maybe make a couple of mistakes along the way. It's just some of that, I think, wisdom that you're looking for and some of that experience that has been gained elsewhere is what's important.
And I have a bit of a selfish follow-up question to that. Do you find bringing in people who have previously had very structured roles or been in bigger companies, can that still be a fit for you, or is that a tougher fit for you?
That's the toughest fit.
Yeah,
that's the toughest fit. And I look at functions like marketing, where you can have an over reliance on agencies, for example, in very structured workplaces. You get marketeers you interview that say, "Oh, my agency does that," and I think classic marketeers, consumer goods, for example, that's a very classic response. Large e-commerce, that's a classic response. I think I think right through all of our departments, whether it's people, whether it's finance, there are only few people that would accept, here's a job description, but really, whatever comes across your plate on a given day that has a dollar sign, if you're in finance, that's yours. And and we can't see what's coming in 3 or 4 months. This is not a structured business that has been maturing for a number of years, that maybe in the product life cycle is in that sort of milk phase, or founders have done their work, they've long since exited, and this is really a management company, which is the way I think about a lot of consumer marketing brands. If I think about FMCG and those, they're just people there that are managing a slow decline. There's no real product innovation. There's no real channel development. They're selling in the same way they always have, fundamentally, for 30 or 40 years. And I think those people are those that are the hardest to fit in. You can find those that come out of, I think, the consulting area is a good one. They might have some structure in a consulting role, professional services, but because they have to move from industry to industry and adapt, I do tend to find there are people that, if with the right amount of training they already have, and with some more, might be people that have come from something quite structured, so quite with some rigor around their thinking, but taught a certain agility because they do move around industries and customers so much. But I think that's the hardest fit, and I think that's potentially one of the world's labor market struggles, is how do we, if people are currently in their mid 30s, early 40s, working for, let's say, what we would have considered traditional successful positions in industry, that are used to that structure, what are we going to do in let's say 10 years time? For those people, their careers are by no means over, and work is shifting so rapidly, and talent, I think, is what people forget, is already shifting this way. So what happens is that in those older industries, talent's leaving at an increasing rate. There's no, if you like, fantastic talent isn't flowing into those organizations anymore, and so those organizations now are starting to see declines. And I guess there's a sort of double whammy for those organizations. They don't have the traditional management trainees coming through, and they've lost all of their good talent. The passionate people, the curious, the growth mindset people, they've long since gone. They jumped into Tesla, they jumped into Apple, they jumped into Facebook, they jumped into Amazon, to use US examples. And traditional industries are left looking around like, okay, who's coming through in our graduate program this year? And it's like, well, we used to be sort of number one, we're now number 11 or 12, and there are people coming out of, graduating now that are thinking, what, it's not even an established startup I'm looking for, or like a scale up. I'm actually happy to go in at the ground level with, 3 other founders.
Yeah, that's shifting so dramatically because it used to mean something.
Yeah, exactly. I heard a great story recently. Someone mentioned law firms and the pressure they're under. And I think we've all heard that, I think, we throw around a phrase like robo lawyer, coming soon. And, we all sort of suspect that it's an area that could be disrupted, but it's already happening. Partners are hanging on to partnerships for longer. It used to be that a young lawyer, that we all sort of might see on TV, they come in at, 21, they work 24/7. And, by the time they get to 30, 9 or 10 years in, they make partner and okay, that was worth it. What we're seeing now is that's not happening. Partners are staying on longer because partners are looking ahead saying, I'm not quite sure what the future is here. And what that means is a lot of the younger graduates, they aren't going into law. They might be doing law as a degree, but then jumping into a startup, jumping into something where they, could have something a lot more varied, something a lot more meaningful. And as a result, the law firms really have this kind of, I would say, hole in the middle where they have a partner and a junior and absolutely no one in between.
Yeah, I think that's the shift there, like the psychological shift that I find is so interesting is that it used to mean something to be like a 30-year person at like a big bank logo, right? Or a big insurance company, or you are like a Royal Bank of Canada guy and your dad was like that. And that just doesn't exist anymore. Like the average number of transitions that people have and lateral moves from company to company has astronomically increased. And I think the labor market it's got to shift, right? Like that in and of itself has almost been disrupted. I think sometimes to the benefit of startups, like I think, but it's a complicated picture still.
Yeah, I think startup successes, what's happening during 2020 with the tech boom that we're seeing, at least in terms of, share prices. I think that's all pointing towards startups and tech as a legitimate choice for graduates. As you say, it used to be, I think, that people might go back to their parents who, if they're a US parent, probably paid a lot of money or have at least subsidized their child through college or at least their higher education. And, here's the acceptance letters, and it's like from these, as you say, these logos and, what's Tommy or Jane going to do? What a great decision. Whereas now I think it's, and I don't know the reaction yet of the older generation. It's, I'm coming out with with X degree, and do you know what? There's 3 people down at my local WeWork or some people that I've been chatting with at university, and yeah, we're going to have a crack at something. And that definitely, I think what's happening at the moment is fueling that. I think there are people that, so long as economically, they can survive, then look, let's at least give this a couple of years and see how we go, because there are enough stories out there that suggest, those founder stories end up with enough results that people think, okay, maybe this is a risk worth taking.
So how do you deal with that piece where like you're in a way, like as a founder or CEO, you are selling to your new hires. You're not selling a dream. You're not lying to anyone, but it's an exciting, cool environment that you're selling. How do you balance that with like the realities of the stress that it takes, the toll that it takes on you to be part of a startup? How do you communicate that honestly and still sell the dream of the cool startup?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think that jumping into a startup is, as you say, can be all-encompassing sometimes, and it's what people think about, just before they go to bed, and sometimes it's what they're thinking about when they wake up, and it can have an influence on your team's lives. There might be less dating when they're young because they're working late nights. There are those elements. I think if I think back to when I started my career in more traditional industries, and I do look around, I don't see it being dramatically different though to corporate life. I think when people are walking into corporates, it's not like they're walking in at 9 and clocking off at 4:30. I think even traditional industries are probably asking more from their younger cohorts than they ever have before as well. I think we all talk about work-life balance, and we all talk about trying to foster the best possible environments for our employees. But I don't think we need to be too concerned that startups are going to be dramatically different to what they're going to see in a corporate environment. I think mentally, if an employee is going to be, the way I often talk about it is, I've got a couple of anecdotes. If you're working in a bank as a young engineer, you're going to work on one tiny cog of one tiny feature of, maybe the terms and conditions page of a website. And if that's mentally stimulating for you to do that, then that sounds like that might be an ideal environment for you. But if you're of the growth mindset, if you want to, you want to get involved, you want to make a difference, I don't think those environments are going to be suitable for you. And so I think the mental adventure and the stimulation you're going to get at a startup, if there is any, let's say stretch versus in let's say, in hours or in effort, I think is normally an easy trade-off to make. The second anecdote there was a fantastic engineer we had out of Toulouse in France. He'd come into Australia, and nearby Toulouse is Airbus, a large, manufacturer. And when he first started, he'd been with us for 3 months, and I asked him, look, how has it gone so far? And he said, well, when I was working for Airbus, I was working on a maintenance system, and in particular, an alarm for the maintenance system that would tell us if the maintenance system on a toilet had failed on an aircraft that's due for production in 2022. So I'm sort of 4 steps back from a system that will exist in 2022. And when I've come here, I'm putting out some code that I'm working on now that'll be in quality assurance next week. And the week after will be live in front of hundreds of thousands of users.
We're going to ship it the following week.
Yeah. So that's I think, the biggest kind of differences that we talk about is that, it's working on something real. It's working on something now. And yes, sometimes there are some side effects, or I shouldn't say side effects, some downsides. And then of course we sell them on, and I shouldn't use the word we sell them on, but we do really simply point out that obviously joining a startup, they have access to equity, they have access to share schemes, and that's the huge difference. Let's just not get paid a salary. If you put in the extra effort here, valuations follow, and so does then a direct, hopefully, impact on an exit for you as a person.
Yeah, no, I think that founder mindset that you're obviously cultivating for your employees, it's showing because of your significant growth. And do you find like, we're going to switch a little bit to mental health, because I want to talk about like how that happens with a decentralized workforce, how that happens with a young workforce. You're kind of the chief let's check in with people officer. How are you doing that with those kind of complications, and then throw in COVID on top of that? How's that going for you?
Sure. You know what? I think tech in general is extremely lucky, and we are extremely lucky because we were already fairly dispersed. So as I say, we have Sydney, London, and New York. So I was on, and I have been on, weekly calls with those teams that are overseas. Anyway, we're used to working remotely. I'm based in Australia, and sure, I will travel to the US and to the UK, but once every 8 weeks, for example, 6 to 8 weeks. So we're used to working remotely. It's always been this kind of remote relationship, I guess, with the people in those teams. And so there hasn't been a big change. There has been for those small teams themselves. However, as I say, they are small, agile teams. And we have found that for the majority of them, we've been able to manage, I would say, relatively easily. Let's face it, we don't have factories. We don't require people to travel into work. we do all enjoy, work that can be done quite easily from home. So I would say that the people that are struggling the most, or those people that probably we need to provide the most help to, would be those with, you can imagine living in a city like New York with very high rents. You end up with very small apartments. You probably end up with a flatmate, and you may not necessarily know that person very well. If they're of a similar mindset, they might also be in sales. So you might have two people in a small apartment, both trying to talk over one another. Those kinds of elements we have to be very mindful of and manage those. You've got people with young families, and young families, again, if say childcare had ceased, we've seen some fantastic photos of, one team member in New York has just recently had a baby, let's say, 6 to 12 months old. And, the couple sitting across from each other, working and rotating, holding a baby, or, in between. And they're wonderful experiences, so long as we can manage to ensure that, mentally it's manageable, and that we're making sure that people have, enough ability to be able to close the laptop and, at a certain point in the day, and really, I think, clearly demarcate between, work time and then some leisure time. We've run, I think that our head of people's run quite regular check-ins. Does anyone, and I think there we're doing it even anonymously, so people can be saying, look, is there anything that we can be doing more, anything that you need help with? And then a few initiatives. I mean, ultimately, I think everyone in the world became a quiz master for a while there, didn't they? The amount of Zoom quizzes that were going on and those kinds of things. But we did find that worked well, and remarkably, the first time we did what we call an all hands, traditionally, we would all gather in the one office in Sydney and have a camera pointed at everyone in Sydney. And then our UK and US colleagues would all join, again, from a room in their office. And so what you've got is like 3 cameras, but on many people. And sometimes it was difficult, particularly if I was presenting or someone else, to get feedback. Because you had a whole sort of room and you couldn't really see anyone's faces. You're just looking at it sort of a myriad. The first time we did an all hands via Zoom, and I could see everyone's faces up close. Everyone could easily come off mute and ask a question. I think they've been more effective than ever. And again, I don't know if that will last forever, but I think some of those experiences for me have been like, wow, here I can actually even get closer than potentially I've been before, because there are direct questions and things that can be asked. Having said all that, I think that we have a huge advantage in that we had a great culture going into COVID.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a lot of hiring. The people that you've got have the right mindset, have the right attitude. They know exactly what they're doing and who they're working for. I think it's going to be interesting to see the results of, or see what's about to happen when you need to onboard quite a few people, and then see, okay, what's this like during a period where everyone's dispersed? Because I think that's going to be a very interesting one to watch, because I think that's significantly harder.
And I'd imagine there's people that you've worked with for maybe a significant amount of time that you haven't met. Is that true? I've heard more of that lately.
Yeah, haven't met.
Like in person, haven't. Is there anyone in your company where you haven't actually physically met?
I think I'm lucky enough to have been in the UK and US just before COVID, I would say March. So I do think I've met everyone in person. I wouldn't say that I've spent a great amount of time with some people for sure. But I'm lucky in that regard. But I do think that would be a very common thing now for companies that have grown since March. We're now in September. So there will be people with a great amount of onboarding that has been done. And I think they're the case studies I'd like to see, I'd like to watch. And I think that's going to be the fascinating thing out of the work from home or new way of working is, where you have, let's say you want to add 20 or 30%, to your teams. How do you get that culture to permeate? I think that's going to be really interesting. But look, I've seen some wonderful things. I've seen companies doing swag drive-bys, I think they call them, where they've got people outside and someone comes past in an Uber with whether it is a gift that month, swag for joining, whatever it is. I mean, we've all tried various things, particularly, usually relating to some sort of online activity. We're going to trial. I've been talking to some of the team about the idea of there is, this need for belonging. I think that's something our head of people's talked about a lot. Belonging. How do you foster belonging is such a key element when it's all, it's all remote. And that's probably one of the most powerful drivers of culture, is feeling like you're a part of a team. And, there's a little bit of Zoom fatigue about it. It's not another quiz or another, that's being, it's getting old. And one of the things we wanted to try was the idea of, yes, getting all on Zoom, but and staying off mute, so having microphones on, but all reading for half an hour, and maybe doing that for three times a week, but reading for half an hour on Zoom with everyone. And maybe, we rotate where you talk about, the book potentially just for a couple of minutes, and each bit of reading is probably, hopefully aimed at some sort of personal growth, or growth that can be, to the advantage of that person. And then the idea of some Zoom quiet time, still on Zoom, but yeah, half an hour to read. I don't know if you remember doing it back at school, but I do. I think they used to call it drop everything and read, and all that kind of thing. And we thought, it's still, you're reading. It's a reflective activity. It's something that takes a little bit of time out, but you're doing it with your colleagues. You can hear the books turn, you can hear the leaves turning, with your colleagues. We're going to give it a try.
Yeah, I like it. I'd like to know how that goes, because I think there's something there that, like, metaphysical, just kind of being in the same feeling, the same space thing, that really improves belonging.
That belonging thing, absolutely.
Yeah.
How else, I imagine that COVID has modified your trajectory, changed some of your business. In fact, I'm quite confident it's helped your business, because you are a mobile learning management system, and you do micro learning, and learning management systems are so important now that there's really no in-classroom thing anymore. How has it shifted for you?
Yeah, what we saw was just a lot more intensity. So existing customers probably doing 3 to 4 times as much using our platforms than they had. So a real shift from whatever was in classroom straight away, right, here's a platform we can use. Where we may have been embedded with a customer in a single department, bang, right through the organization. So, we're talking, in a matter of months, we saw 300% growth, I think. Absolutely insane numbers. And then the same, when it comes to new customers, obviously there's there's a great deal more inquiry people are looking for. If we're going to, embark on a digital journey, let's make sure that it's not, a traditional B2B platform that might have employees tied to desktops, etc. What does a next generation learning platform look like? And obviously we've been, as you point out, that's been very beneficial for us as a market leader in this space. And so, yeah, it has been for us, it's a global tragedy, but it has been, for us, it's really changed the landscape. I think there's a famous kind of cartoon where you have someone, what forced the most digital disruption in your industry, and it was like CEO, CFO, COVID-19, and for us, yeah, I mean, not just people dropping out of big legacy systems, but even, we sort of joke that the world's biggest training platform is probably PowerPoint, and the amount of people that might be in face-to-face classroom with a PowerPoint, whether it's for onboarding, whether it's for, toolbox talks, whether it's for, skills development, all of that basically, as you say, has had to come on to digital. And so, our position in the market means that that's been, very good for us.
Has there been a shift toward more micro learning? Like, as traditional learning leaves bricks and mortar and leaves big institutional platforms, becomes more mobile, have you seen a shift toward more micro learning?
Yeah, I mean, that's all we do, because our platform really is designed mobile first. It's not suitable for long form learning. So, EdApp only offers, micro learning. You could make long form learning within it if you wanted to. Our learning team would strongly advise you don't. But that's all we do. And if we look at the amount of now of the larger systems beginning to talk about microlearning via, some of those larger systems from the likes of SAP, Oracle, and some of those other larger players now have a kind of mobile app version. It might still be a bit pinch and zoom and not really be a mobile first experience, but because they have one, even, they're beginning, I would say, or they're probably now really trying to embed that microlearning into their current customer base, because they see the results are so much better, the engagement's higher, and the actual learning outcomes are superior. So I think there is a huge shift to microlearning, and I think probably a few years ago there were people in the learning and development industry that were maybe a little bit skeptical. I think for a lot of them, they recognized there was a time and place for it, but they really felt like, again, microlearning is part of a blended learning solution, which we certainly agree with. But obviously with the lack of classrooms, then, that then goes. So there is this need to deliver, longer form pieces in smaller chunks, and people have that smartphone beside them. It's the most digitally relevant device that you can put learning on. And so I think the numbers would suggest that microlearning has increased, exponentially.
And let's shift to 5 years down the road. Is it a matter of it becoming just even more mobile and more micro? How much more micro and more mobile can you get? And where do you see this going? Where do you see the next edge of learning being created?
I think that whilst ever, if we look at video consumption, for example, video consumption on YouTube, on mobile is just, obviously those numbers are through the roof. And I think that video is one element that's very strong in learning, that even in classroom is used quite a lot. And I think, while ever, in the absence of vaccines, et cetera, if we think about the next couple of years, the return to the classroom in a corporate environment looks extremely unlikely. And so therefore, that digitally led learning is only going to get stronger. And in our opinion, the ability for us to even get video onto smartphones it's a known behavior. People like YouTube are doing it wonderful. We can see that the viewing statistics are there. People are willing to spend, more than just those micro minutes on their mobile watching a video. So that particular bit of media alone has fantastic application onto the mobile device. So I really can't see any limitation to, in the short to medium term, for long form moving into mobile. We certainly see that once learners are exposed to mobile learning, that within organizations, it then proliferates right through. And that usually comes from learner feedback, from people saying, that they might be in the finance department. They've seen the marketing department using, EdApp as a way to learn. And, their answer is, well, hang on, can we do everything like that? I mean, why aren't we able to also, run our learning like that? And we're seeing more and more long form, more and more long form courses come into microlearning. So I don't see an end for it. Of course, we're not out in the market saying that, microlearning is the answer to everything. And we see very successful blended learning solutions, of which microlearning is just a part. But one of the things that we've done, for example, is we now embed Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc., within EdApp. So you can actually create a lesson, create a number of pre-lessons that might be only minutes in length. And then you can actually structure a Zoom lesson as part of that course. It'll save it to your calendar on your device, so you won't miss that particular Zoom session. If you miss it, you can watch a recording of it later. But then you can proceed through that course, having those face-to-face elements, albeit now delivered by Zoom, and then back into your microlearning to embed and reinforce that knowledge. So we've even been able to blend a little bit of, let's say, COVID face-to-face into our offering. And so we're seeing that's having some, really large take up. We introduced another new feature recently, which we call, discussions. And it's a live way, again, to interact in context with the rest of the cohort that's working through that course with you. And we see that working with thousands of learners. So, of course, it has its roots in social learning, but we're able to bring that into micro learning. So, we really feel with that sort of social learning aspect, the video aspect, even the live with Zoom, it can really fulfill a lot of the requirements of a blended learning solution, on your mobile device.
So the next space that's being occupied is like socializing and democratizing, making a community out of what was previously like a lonely work kind of thing, which is on your mobile device.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've taken that, even further and looked at, how do we get learning, out of even the large corporates and into parts of society where people don't have access to it. And you're probably aware we launched a really large initiative with United Nations called Educate All, where we allow NGOs, community groups, anyone that's a passionate educator who would like to use our platform for free, they are able to do so. But the content they create flows into a public library. And that public library is inaccessible to any what we call individual learner. So anyone that may not be a part of a team, anyone that wants to better themselves, they can actually access that public library absolutely free as long as they have a smartphone. And they can access all that same courseware that's being made available. And there's wonderful courses on there from people like Unitar, from people like Marley Spoon, from people like Pernod Ricard, lots of our corporate partners and clients that have chosen to make that material available on the public library. And so that gives us that ability to really democratize learning and allow micro-learning to be available to those who may not be lucky enough to work for an employer that values learning and development. So we've seen a number of organizations, particularly community groups in both the US and UK, using the tool for that very purpose. So they're creating lessons. In the United States, we have a group called Design for Humanity who their sort of mission is to help, that they were formed out of the Black Lives Matter movement and helping, that segment of the population access skills development and resume development and helping them, apply for paid work. In the same way in the UK, a group of people came together that were educators that wanted to help furloughed workers who may not return to work, again, for a very similar mission, to help upskill them, retrain them, get them ready for, a role, hopefully, that they're going to be applying for when the UK economy recovers.
Yeah, that's phenomenal, Darren, and I applaud you because you've had market success. You've also had significant success in building your ESG profile and literally doing something that's great for the world. So thank you just for doing that, because I think you're bringing learning to a whole new place. When we first started and piloted Headversity, of course, a lot of that content we were using EdApp because it was such an easy to use platform. We were able to get our messaging out there. So we've benefited from working with your group. So I just want to finish up with a question that we try to ask everyone. Take it where you would like. How do you, Darren, keep your mental health? How do you keep mentally fit? What do you do to keep on top of your game and stay healthy?
So I'm super lucky. I've got a young family, so with two girls, so they definitely keep me on my toes. And I think outside of that, I literally also keeping on my toes. We're blessed to live in a country like Australia where the climate is quite reasonable, and so at our doorstep we've got the ability to swim, the ability to jump on a bike, to go for a run, and so I do find that some structure around a little bit of exercise gives you time to reflect. It gives you time to think. It sort of reminds me sometimes on who I've got to go back and apologize to for being a little bit short with that day, and the combination of those two things, I think having a young family is always, life's mission, I guess. And so there's always development going on there with particularly with young children. And then just being able to get out into the environment would be, and get those endorphins for me flowing is something that also really, really works. I find I'm sure that there'd be a lot of my team members that would be able to tell if I haven't been outside that morning.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Darren, thank you for joining us. Congratulations on your success of, your young family, your success with EdApp, creating that culture through exponential growth. You said multiple times, I'm lucky. There may have been a little bit of luck, but undoubtedly your hard work and visionary mindset, your growth mindset has taken you to some amazing heights. So thanks for joining us, and congratulations on everything you've done.
Thanks a lot. Thanks very much.